All right, let's get right into this. We're going to talk about Iran today. But this isn't just a story about geopolitics or religion. It's really about something much bigger. It's a case study in how any modern, educated society can be, well, psychologically hijacked, and often without people even realizing it until it's way too late.
Seriously, just for a second, think about it. What's the first image that pops into your head? Whatever it is, chances are it's been shaped by decades and decades of media coverage. But what if that image isn't the whole story? What if it's not even the most important part of the story?
See, to really understand what's happening in Iran today, we have to go back in time. Not that far, actually, just one generation. We need to see the Iran that existed before the headlines we all know. An Iran whose memory is now colliding with the present in a really explosive way.
And wow, the contrast is just jarring, isn't it? On one side, you have the image most of us hold in our heads. But on the other, that was the lived reality for millions of Iranians who are still alive today. A reality of wearing jeans, listening to rock music, and living in a world that looked completely, and I mean completely, different.
And this is so important to get. This wasn't some primitive society waiting to be modernized. It was already there. Back in the 60s and 70s, Tehran felt like a European capital. Women were making huge strides in every professional field. We're talking doctors, lawyers, you name it. The universities were world-class, art and science were absolutely flourishing. This was a secular, educated, and culturally vibrant place. And understanding that was the starting point is the key to understanding everything that came next.
And that right there is the core of this whole story. Where Iran is today isn't the result of some slow, natural cultural shift. It was a complete interruption, a takeover. And the real question is, how is that even possible?
So, how exactly do you take over a country like that? The answer isn't military conquest, not in the traditional sense. It was a psychological one. This is the key concept, a psychological hijack. It's not about tanks rolling in and taking over land. It's about seizing the story. It's about fundamentally changing the rules of reality itself. And, most importantly, deciding who gets to enforce those new rules. So how did it happen? Well, it really boils down to 3 steps. First, you exploit very real resentment. And let's be clear, the Shah was becoming corrupt and authoritarian, and people were angry, so there was a void. Into that void stepped a movement that didn't sell tyranny. No, it sold a moral cleansing. It promised justice and independence. And that was the brilliant, tragic trap, because the real power shift in any revolution is simply about who is now allowed to use violence to enforce the new rules.
Okay, so the revolution happens, but how does that new reality get locked into place for decades? It wasn't built on belief alone. It was built on something much, much more powerful.
And this is such a critical distinction to make. The system was maintained not because everybody suddenly became a devout true believer, but because they became afraid. Afraid of being an outcast. Afraid of being judged, afraid of being on the wrong side of the new power structure.
And this fear wasn't just some abstract thing. It was enforced through very specific social mechanics. Public rituals turned into loyalty tests. What you said in private, even to friends, could be dangerous. So silence became a survival strategy. An entire generation grew up learning what not to say. The system survived by forcing millions of people to treat the completely abnormal as perfectly normal.
Just take a moment and read this quote. It perfectly captures the psychological trap. When you are forced to profess a belief, objective truth doesn't just become irrelevant, it actually becomes dangerous to you. Now that system of fear, it works. For a long time it works. Until, one day, it doesn't. And what we're seeing on the streets today is the result of that system breaking down. It's this long simmering conflict where the past is literally crashing into the present.
And this is precisely why the current movement is so potent. The protesters aren't fighting for some abstract, unknown future. They are fighting to reclaim a known past. They are demanding the return of something they feel was stolen from their parents and their grandparents.
So who is it out on the streets? Well, look closely. It's not a fringe group. It's students. It's professionals. It's the descendants of that very same modern, educated class from the 1970s. These are young people who grew up with what you might call smuggled memories, hearing stories from their parents, seeing old photo albums of a different Iran, and they want it back. And what this all reveals is the incredible power of collective memory. Once a people remembers who they were and what they are capable of being, it becomes incredibly difficult to keep them down with fear alone.
Okay, so all this pressure, from the economy, from this new generation, from the world watching, it's revealing major cracks in the system. So, what happens next? Well, it likely comes down to one of three main paths. First up, you have the iron fist path. This is where the regime just doubles down on repression. More surveillance, more force. It might work for a while, but it makes the whole system incredibly brittle. The second option is a fracture within. This is where some of the elites start making deals behind the scenes to save themselves, leading to slow, controlled reforms designed to prevent a total collapse. And then there's the wild card, the break point. This is the most unpredictable path. It's where the enforcers, the security forces, simply stop believing in the system they're paid to protect. And if that psychological barrier breaks, the whole thing can collapse incredibly fast. So as we wrap this up, it's really easy to look at this whole situation and think, okay, that's a story about Iran. But it's not. It's bigger than that. In a way, it's a preview, a case study, with lessons for pretty much everyone. And here it is, the universal warning. The story of Iran shows us what happens to any society when a powerful narrative takes over legitimate governance, and when fear becomes the main tool used to control the population instead of their consent. Which brings us to one final and kind of haunting question. It's the question that sits right at the heart of this entire story, and really it's a question every society ought to ask itself.
And the answer, it seems, is always the same. When a population loses its memory, when it forgets its own story and its identity, someone else is always waiting to step in and provide one for them. And once you see that mechanism, you start seeing it everywhere.